My mother died on a Tuesday in October. She had been sick for 2 years. Breast cancer, then the lungs, then the kind of slow unwinding that happens when a body has fought as hard as it can and has simply run out of fight. She was 73 years old, and she died in the house where she had lived for 40 years, in the bedroom at the end of the hall, with me on one side of the bed and my sister on the other. Her name was Eleanor. She was a small, precise woman who ironed her pillowcases and kept her recipes in a binder organized by category and never raised her voice in my memory. She expressed love through proximity, through showing up, through being there, through the particular attentiveness of a woman who noticed everything and said very little. She had been the steadiest thing in my life for 47 years. I am Patricia. I am the biological daughter. I was born 2 years before she adopted my sister. My sister's name is Anne. My mother adopted Anne when Anne was 3 days old. I was 2 years old. I have no memory of life before Anne. She has simply always been there, in the other bedroom, at the other chair at the kitchen table, at the other end of every photograph from every year of our childhood. She is my sister the way breathing is breathing. I have never thought of her any other way. Our mother treated us identically. I want to be clear about that. There was no favoritism that I ever detected, no distinction in how she loved us or how she spoke to us or what she expected of us. We had the same curfews and the same chores and the same lectures about the importance of thank you notes. We had the same mother, completely. The attorney's name was Gerald Marsh. He had been my mother's lawyer for 20 years. He was a quiet man in a beige office with a view of a parking lot. And he read the will at 10 in the morning, 4 days after she died, with Anne and me sitting across from him and our mother's oldest friend, Barbara, sitting in the corner. The will was straightforward. The house came to me, the car came to me, her jewelry divided between me and Anne, her savings split equally, a small amount to Barbara, a donation to the church. And then Gerald paused. He said, "There is one additional bequest. It is specific in its instructions, and I want to read it carefully." He looked at Anne. He said, "To my daughter Anne, I leave the box that has been kept under my bed for the past 31 years. This box is to be given directly to Anne and is not to be opened by anyone else, including Patricia. Anne will know what to do with it. I trust her completely." I looked at Anne. Anne was looking at Gerald. Gerald said, "Your mother was very specific about this. She asked me to note it clearly in the will and to repeat it verbally. The box is for Anne, not to be shared unless Anne chooses to share it." Anne said, "I didn't know about any box." Gerald nodded. He said, "She mentioned that you might not. She said that was all right. She said you'd understand when you saw it." We drove to the house together after, Anne and I in my car, not speaking much. The house felt the way it always felt after she had been gone from it for any length of time, slightly held in, slightly waiting, like a house that knows its person is not coming back. The box was where Gerald said it would be, under the bed, pushed toward the back, behind the spare blankets she kept there. A cardboard box, the kind from a liquor store, sealed with packing tape that had yellowed with age. Anne was written on the top in my mother's handwriting. Just that. Just the name. I carried it out and set it on the bed. We stood there looking at it. Anne said, "Did you know about this?" I said, "No." She said, 31 years. I said, "That's how long she had it." Anne picked it up. She held it for a moment. Then she looked at me and said, "I need to open this alone. I'm sorry." I said, "Of course." I went and sat in the kitchen. I made tea. I sat at the table where I had eaten 10,000 meals as a child, and I listened to the quiet of the house, and I thought about what could possibly be in a box that my mother had kept for 31 years and addressed to my sister and asked not to be opened by me. I was not angry. I want to be honest about that. I was not angry. I was something else, something closer to wonder, or to the specific unease of realizing that the person you thought you knew completely had a room you had never been in. Anne was in the bedroom for 40 minutes. When she came out, her eyes were red and she was holding a photograph. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table and she set the photograph between us. It was a woman I had never seen, young, maybe 20, 21, dark hair, light eyes. She was holding a baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, and she was looking down at the baby with an expression I recognized immediately, because I had seen it on new mothers before, and there is no expression quite like it. Total, undone love. The kind that has just arrived and doesn't know yet what it will cost. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I looked at Anne. She said, "That's my birth mother." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "There was a letter from my mother. She explained everything. She had kept it for 31 years. My mother had kept this photograph and a letter and a collection of things I was only beginning to understand in a box under her bed for 31 years, since Anne was 3 days old, since the beginning." I said, "What does the letter say?" Anne looked at the table. Then she looked at me. She said, "Do you want to know?" I said, "Only if you want to tell me." She told me. My mother had known Anne's birth mother. Not well, not as a close friend, but they had lived in the same neighborhood for 2 years before Anne was born, before my mother moved to the house where we grew up. The birth mother's name was Claire. She was 20 years old, and she was alone, and she was frightened. And at some point during her pregnancy, she had told my mother what was happening, and my mother had listened. When Claire gave birth, she could not keep the baby. She had known from the beginning that she could not keep the baby. But she had asked, quietly, through the adoption agency, through channels that my mother had apparently been paying attention to, she had asked if there was any possibility the child could go to someone she knew, someone she trusted. My mother had already been thinking about adoption. She had been thinking about it for 2 years, since her first pregnancy had ended badly, and the doctors had told her what that meant for the future. She had already begun the paperwork. She had already begun to imagine. When Claire's request came through, my mother said yes. She adopted Anne knowing exactly who her birth mother was. She kept that knowledge, and the photograph, and the letter Claire had written to the daughter she was giving away, in a box under her bed for 31 years. She did not tell Anne. She did not tell me. She waited. I sat at that kitchen table and I tried to understand why. Why keep it? Why not tell Anne years ago, when Anne was old enough to understand, when the knowing might have mattered differently? Why leave it in a box under a bed until after she was gone? Anne said, "She explains that in the letter." I said, "What does she say?" Anne was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She says she was afraid." Not of Anne knowing. She says she always intended to tell Anne. She was afraid of what it meant that she had known Claire. She was afraid that knowing would change how Anne felt about the adoption, about being chosen, about whether it was real. She thought. She stopped. She said, she thought that if Anne knew her birth mother had specifically asked for her to go to our family, it might feel less like being chosen and more like being arranged. She wanted Anne to know she was chosen. She wanted that to be the whole of it. I looked at the photograph. The young woman with dark hair looking down at a wrapped baby with total, undone love. She had chosen my mother specifically. She had trusted my mother with her daughter. My mother had kept that trust for 31 years, had kept it so carefully, so completely, that she carried it alone rather than risk it changing anything. I said, "Was there a letter from Claire in the box?" Anne nodded. She said, "There was a letter from Claire to me, written the day she signed the papers. My mother kept it in the box without reading it. It was sealed. She said in her letter that she had never opened it, that it wasn't hers to open." I said, "Have you read it?" Anne said, "Not yet." I needed a minute. We sat there together for a long time. The tea went cold. The afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor the way it always did in that house, slowly, from the window over the sink, to the table, to the door. I had watched that light move my whole life and never thought about it until now. I said, "Are you angry at her? At Mom?" Anne was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't know. I think I understand why she did it. I think I even think she was trying to protect me in the way she understood how to protect people, which was to hold things carefully until the right time. And she waited too long. She always waited too long to say the hard things. That was Mom." I said, "Yes, that was Mom." She said, "I'm sad she didn't tell me. I would have wanted to know. I would have wanted to know that Claire asked for me specifically, that she knew where I was going, that she..." She stopped. She pressed her hand to her mouth for a moment. Then she said, "She knew I was okay. Claire knew I was okay because she had trusted the person I was going to, and she never had to wonder." I thought about that. I thought about my mother carrying that for 31 years. Not as a secret that shamed her, as a trust that she was keeping. She was keeping it for Claire, who had given her daughter to someone she trusted. She was keeping it for Anne, until Anne was old enough and ready and the time was right. And then she had waited too long, and the time had never been right. And then she was dying, and still she couldn't find the words. And so she put it in a box, and she wrote a letter, and she left it under her bed, where it had been for 31 years. She trusted Anne with it in the end. Not your mother, specifically you. She had known exactly what she was doing. 3 days later, Anne called me. She was crying. She said, "Patricia, I need you to come over right now." I drove to her apartment. She was sitting at her kitchen table with the letter from Claire in front of her, open. I sat down. I waited. She said, "She wrote this the day she signed the papers." Anne was 3 days old. She says, Anne stopped. She took a breath. She said, "She says she had been watching my mother for 2 years. She says she had seen her with me. With you as a baby. And she had seen how she was with you. She said she had thought about it for months, and she knew if she was going to give her daughter to anyone, it would be someone who loved a child the way your mother loved you." I could not speak. Anne said, "She says she used to watch us from across the street sometimes, me and you and Mom, when I was little. She says she saw me once in the yard. I must have been about 4, and I was chasing a butterfly, and Mom was sitting on the porch watching me, and she says she thought, 'She's okay. She's more than okay. She's exactly where she was supposed to be.'" The kitchen was very quiet. I said, "Did Claire know she was in the box? That Mom kept her photograph?" Anne shook her head slowly. She said, "I don't think so. I think Mom kept it for herself. As proof, maybe. That she had done the right thing. That the person who had trusted her had not been wrong to trust her." We sat there for a long time. Eventually, we made fresh tea and we looked at the photograph together, and I told Anne what I remembered about being 2 years old when she came home, which was very little, but which included a specific memory of being placed on the couch and told to sit very still, and then a blanket being put in my arms and being told, "This is your sister. This is Anne. She is yours now." I told Anne that I had apparently promptly tried to give her back. Anne laughed through her tears. She said, "Of course you did." I said, "I changed my mind within 20 minutes. She said, "I know. Mom told me that story 17 times. We have not found Claire. We have talked about looking. Anne is not sure yet. She is still inside the letter, still inside the box, still sitting with 31 years of things she is learning all at once. There is no timeline for this. We are not rushing toward anything. What I know is that my mother kept a trust for 31 years. She kept it imperfectly, too long, too quietly, in a way that cost Anne something. But she kept it. She kept the photograph and the letter and all the small pieces of evidence that Claire had loved Anne from a distance, and she put them in a box, and when she was dying, she thought very carefully about what to do with them, and she made a choice. She gave them to Anne, not to me, to the person they belonged to. I have been angry at my mother for many things in my life. This is not one of them. The box has been under her bed for 31 years. Now it is on Anne's kitchen table. That is where it belongs. I have thought a great deal in the weeks since about what my mother was protecting. Not herself. I don't think it was that, or not primarily. She was not a woman who protected herself at the expense of others. She was a woman who protected the people she loved, sometimes past the point where protection became something closer to silence, which is its own kind of harm. But the intention was always love. The execution was sometimes wrong. That was my mother. I think she was protecting the story. The story of Anne's adoption, as Anne had always understood it, was this. My mother and father had wanted a second child. The first pregnancy had been complicated, and the doctors had said there would not be another biological child. They had applied to adopt. They had been matched with a baby girl 3 days old. They had brought her home, and she was ours. That story is true. Every word of it is true. What my mother added to it, without telling anyone, was that the baby girl had been specifically requested to go to our family by a birth mother who had watched us from across the street and decided we were the right place for her daughter. My mother thought that adding this to the story might change it, might make it feel less like being chosen and more like being placed. She thought that the choosing, the pure, unconditional choosing of a child, not because you had to, but because you wanted to, because you saw this specific child and decided she was yours. She thought that was something sacred that she didn't want complicated. I understand that. I even think she was partly right. The choosing was sacred. It was real. It was the foundation of everything. What she didn't see was that Claire's trust in her was also sacred. That a young woman of 20, alone and frightened, watching a family across the street and thinking, them. I trust them with my daughter. That was its own form of choosing. A different kind. Not less real, not less meaningful. Anne deserved to know both things. Anne deserved to know that she was chosen twice. Once by our mother, who had wanted a child and seen Anne and said yes. And once by Claire, who had loved Anne for 9 months and made the hardest decision a mother can make, and had looked across a street at a woman she barely knew and trusted her completely. 2 people chose Anne. She only knew about one. My mother meant well. She almost always meant well, and she was not a woman who explained herself. That was not how she operated. She showed up, and she did the thing, and she trusted that the thing spoke for itself. She had kept Claire's photograph for 31 years, kept it carefully, kept it where Anne could find it when the time was right. She had written a letter. She had thought about how to give it to Anne in a way that let Anne have it privately, without me in the room, without the weight of an audience. She was not careless with this. She was not indifferent. She was a woman who had been carrying something for a long time and finally found a way to put it down. I have been thinking about Claire. I have been thinking about her almost constantly since Anne sat across from me and told me what was in the letter. A woman who would be in her early 50s now, if she is living, who gave her daughter to a stranger she had watched from across the street and then spent decades not knowing, couldn't know, had signed away the right to know whether her daughter was all right. Anne is thinking about finding her. She has not decided. She said to me last week, "I don't know if she wants to be found. I don't know what she has told the people in her life. I don't want to arrive in someone's world like a bomb." I said, "You wouldn't be a bomb. You'd be an answer." Anne said, "Maybe. Or maybe she made peace with not knowing a long time ago, and I would be reopening something that had finally closed." I said, "Or maybe she has been hoping for 31 years. Anne said, "That too." There is no good map for this. Anne is walking through territory that has no existing trails, and she is doing it carefully, which is the right way to do it. I am not going to push her. I told her, "Whatever you decide, I'll be there." She said, "I know." She always says, "I know," which is the best thing. We went back to our mother's house last Saturday. We had more sorting to do, the practical, necessary work of taking apart a household, which takes so much longer than you expect and is so much sadder in the specific than in the abstract. We worked in the same rooms we had worked in our whole lives. Anne took the kitchen, I took the study. We traded off in the afternoon. At one point, I walked through the bedroom and I looked at the space under the bed where the box had been. Just the spot. Empty now. I thought about my mother deciding at some point in the last years of her life that she had waited long enough, that it was time to put instructions in the will, to make it official, to ensure that the box reached Anne regardless of what happened. She had made a plan. She had trusted Gerald, and she had trusted Anne, and she had written a letter that she believed would explain things well enough. She was mostly right. She waited too long, but she got there. She found a way. That is the whole of my mother, I think. Quiet and stubborn and late sometimes, but always, in the end, finding a way to do the thing that needed to be done. Always showing up in the way she knew how to show up. The box is on Anne's kitchen table now. The photograph is in a frame. My mother loved us both completely. I never doubted that for a moment. I do not doubt it now. The box has been under her bed for 31 years. Now it is where it belongs.